Hi everyone, and welcome back to Secrets in the Dark. Before we begin, we want to take a moment to thank you all for your incredible support. Your engagement, likes, and comments have helped this channel grow into a thriving community of true crime enthusiasts. If you're new here, consider subscribing and joining our discussions on these real-life mysteries. Today's case is one that has haunted many: a mother, a wife, a woman who gave everything to keep her family together, only to meet a tragic fate. This is the story of Shanann Watts, and her heartbreaking fight to save her marriage.
Hey guys, my name is Shanann. I just want you to know a little bit of my story. I went through one of the darkest times of my life, and then I met Chris. And he's the best thing that has ever happened to me. So Chris and I are sitting here waiting to board our flight to Miami, and then we're gonna fly all the way back home to see our girls in Denver. So we're super excited. It's been a wonderful, amazing experience this week.
Imagine waking up one morning, expecting another ordinary day, only to realize that everything you believed to be true was slipping through your fingers. The laughter in your home, once warm and familiar, now feels distant. Conversations with the person you love seem hollow, their eyes no longer reflecting the love they once held for you. There is a weight in the air, an invisible force pressing down, suffocating, relentless. You reach out, desperate to hold on to the life you built, but the more you grasp, the further away it drifts. Words meant to reassure now carry an emptiness that chills you to the core. Shanann Watts lived for her family. She was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a woman who believed in building something real, a life filled with love, commitment, and security. Every picture, every video she shared told the world of a home full of joy, of little girls who adored their father, of a husband who was supposed to be her partner, her rock. To the outside world, she had everything: a growing family, a beautiful home, a husband she cherished. But Shanann could feel it. A distance. A shift in the man she had once known so well. It wasn't just a passing phase or the strain of everyday life. It was something deeper. Something unspoken. And yet, no matter how much she tried to reach him, he remained just out of reach. The man who had once looked at her with love in his eyes now barely met her gaze. The nights grew longer, the silence heavier. And as she carried their unborn child, she clung to the hope that whatever was changing between them could still be saved. She sent texts filled with questions, with love, with pleas for honesty. Some went unanswered. Others were met with vague reassurances, words that felt carefully chosen rather than heartfelt. And then there were the lies. Subtle at first, barely noticeable, but they were there. A missed call. A message ignored. A dinner that ran too late. The kind of small betrayals that don't mean much until they do. Until they pile up and form something impossible to ignore. In the coming weeks, Shanann would fight harder than ever to keep her family together. She would beg for the truth, for any sign that the man she loved was still there. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Chris Watts had already made his choice. A choice that would shatter everything. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling details behind a seemingly perfect marriage that ended in unimaginable tragedy. Before we begin, we invite you to share your thoughts throughout this video. Do you believe this tragedy could have been prevented? Comment below and let's discuss. Frederick, Colorado. A quiet town, nestled in the vast, open landscape of the Centennial State. A place where families settle, seeking safety, community, and the promise of a stable future. It was here, in a neatly kept two-story home on Saratoga Trail, that Chris and Shanann Watts built their life together. From the outside, it looked idyllic, an American dream painted in soft pastels, captured in smiling family photos and videos of birthdays, milestones, and lazy Sunday mornings. Shanann, vibrant and full of life, was the kind of woman who left an impression. She had a presence, a confidence that radiated in every room she entered. She was a mother first, fiercely protective of her daughters, Bella and Celeste, and an expectant mother to a third child, a baby boy she had already named Nico. She was also a successful businesswoman, thriving in a health and wellness company, where she inspired others with her dedication to family and financial independence. Chris, in contrast, was quiet, reserved. The kind of man who didn't command attention, but rather blended into the background. He worked long hours as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum, providing for his family with a steady job. To those who knew him, he was the dedicated husband and father who stood beside Shanann at company events, smiling as she spoke passionately about their future together. To the world, they were a couple that had it all. But not everything is as it appears. Beneath the surface, something was changing. A rift was forming, slow at first, like the quiet cracking of ice before it splinters. Shanann could feel it, even if she couldn't yet put a name to it. Chris had become distant. The warmth in his voice, the affection in his touch, had begun to fade. The man who once called her his best friend, the man who once held her without hesitation, now seemed detached. And as the months passed, the space between them only grew. June 2018. Summer had arrived in Colorado, and with it came a change in routine. Shanann and the girls packed their bags and boarded a flight to North Carolina, where they would spend 5 weeks visiting family. It was a chance for the girls to see their grandparents, for Shanann to reconnect with her roots, and for Chris, a chance to be alone. At first, Shanann expected the distance to bring them closer. They would text, they would call, they would miss each other. That's how it had always been. But this time, something was different. The calls grew shorter. The text messages became fewer. When they did talk, Chris seemed distracted, disinterested, as if he were somewhere else entirely. And then, there were the changes. Subtle, but undeniable. Chris had always been fit, but suddenly, he was at the gym more than ever, obsessed with working out, with eating healthy. His once simple wardrobe was now being replaced with new clothes, his phone seemingly glued to his hand at all times. It wasn't just the physical changes, though. It was the way he spoke, the way he carried himself. It was as if he was preparing for something, or someone. Shanann could feel it. She wasn't naive. She knew when something was wrong. She had been married to Chris for 8 years, had built a life with him, shared 2 children with him. She knew the way he looked at her when he was in love. And she knew now that look was gone. As the days passed, Shanann became increasingly unsettled. She confided in friends, expressing her fears that Chris had lost interest in their marriage. She sent text messages, asking if something was wrong, if there was another woman. The replies she received were brief, dismissive. July 31, 2018. She texted Chris directly, voicing her concerns in a way that could no longer be ignored. Shanann, I realized during this trip what's missing in our relationship. It's only one-way emotions and feelings. You don't consider others at all, nor think about others' feelings. I try to give you space, but while you are working and living the bachelor life, I'm carrying our third and fighting with our 2 kids daily and trying to work and make money. Chris, I'm sorry for the way I've been acting. It's just been in my head and I haven't been right at all. But not right didn't begin to explain what was happening inside Chris Watts. He wasn't just distant. He wasn't just distracted. He was living a double life. And while Shanann was thousands of miles away, trying desperately to hold on to her family, Chris had already begun to let go. And then, there was the moment that changed everything. The moment that shattered any illusions Shanann had about their marriage. August 9, 2018. Chris sent a chilling text message in response to Shanann's continued pleas for honesty. Chris, I don't want to erase 8 years just like that. I'm not sure what's in my head. I don't know if it's my parents, the 3rd pregnancy, if I'm just scared or what. It was vague. Unclear. But it was enough. Enough for Shanann to know that she had lost him. By this time, Chris had already made up his mind. Shanann, though exhausted and heartbroken, was still fighting. She believed, or at least wanted to believe, that their marriage could be saved. By now, he had completely detached himself from the life he once shared with Shanann. His texts were robotic, his affection forced. There were moments of guilt, moments where he seemed to wrestle with himself, but ultimately, the path he had chosen was clear. And the lies were piling up. August 11, 2018. Chris told Shanann he was going to a baseball game with coworkers. In reality, he had hired a babysitter and taken another woman, his mistress, out on a date. As he sat across from Nicole Kessinger at dinner, laughing, flirting, pretending to be a man unburdened, Shanann was home, wondering why the man she loved had become a stranger. August 13, 2018. 1:48 a.m. Shanann arrived back home from a work trip to Arizona. Surveillance footage captured her stepping onto the porch, dragging her suitcase behind her, unaware that the man waiting for her inside had already decided her fate. In just a few hours, the Watts family would no longer exist. July 31, 2018. Shanann, you okay? It's like you don't want to talk. I kept trying to talk and I had to dig it out of you. Chris, I'm fine, baby. The last few days at work have put a lot of responsibility on me with new people. I didn't mean to seem short, boo. I love you to the moon and back. Shanann, I wish my husband wanted to talk to me. Shanann felt it slipping through her fingers. The life they had built together, the love they had once shared, it was fading. And no matter how desperately she reached out, no matter how many times she asked what was wrong, Chris remained distant. Elusive. His words were carefully chosen, but his actions told a different story. A story of a man who had already made up his mind. What Shanann didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Chris Watts wasn't just emotionally detached. He had already stepped out of their marriage. He wasn't just distracted, he was preoccupied. With someone else. Her gut told her something was wrong. She had been married to this man for 8 years. She knew his patterns, his habits, the way he moved through their world together. And yet now, he felt like a stranger. The sudden interest in the gym. The constant phone use. The late nights. The excuses. Chris Watts wasn't just confused. He wasn't just distant. He was having an affair. Nicole Kessinger. A coworker. A woman who had walked into his life when Shanann and the girls left for North Carolina that summer. She was new to the company, a geologist working in the same oil fields where Chris spent his days. At first, it had been casual. A flirtation. But as the weeks passed, it became more. It became late-night conversations, secret rendezvous, and whispered promises of a future where he was free. Free of the life he had built. Free of Shanann. Free of responsibility. For Chris, it was intoxicating. A life where he wasn't a husband, a father, a man weighed down by obligation. With Nicole, he could be someone else. Someone new. She made him feel wanted, desirable, alive. And with every passing day, with every stolen moment together, he became more convinced that this was what he wanted. It was during these weeks, while Shanann was miles away, trying to hold on to her family, that Chris made a decision. A decision that would change everything. August 9, 2018. Shanann, I don't know how you fell out of love with me in 5.5 weeks or if this has been going on for a long time, but you don't plan another baby if you're not in love. Kids don't deserve a broken family. Chris, I'm just confused. I don't know what's in my head. I don't know if it's my parents, the third pregnancy, if I'm just scared or what. Chris wasn't confused. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was preparing to leave. He was laying the groundwork, making sure the transition would be smooth. But Shanann wasn't willing to let go so easily. She fought for her marriage. She believed in it. She believed in the family they had built together, in the vows they had taken. She ordered books on marriage counseling. She planned romantic gestures. She did everything she could to pull Chris back to her. And yet, he slipped further and further away. By now, the deception was complete. Chris had crafted an alternate reality, one where he was single, unburdened, available for Nicole whenever she wanted him. He had begun telling her things, about his marriage, about Shanann, things that were carefully twisted, deliberately crafted to justify what he was doing. In his version of the story, Shanann was controlling. She was difficult. She was the problem. It was easier that way. Easier than admitting the truth. Chris wasn't just having an affair. He was fully immersed in it. He was spending every possible moment with Nicole, lying to Shanann to cover his tracks. On August 11th, 2 days after Shanann had confronted him about their marriage, he made another decision. He told her he was going to a Rockies baseball game with friends. In reality, he was taking Nicole on a date. They spent the evening together, laughing, touching, lost in their own world. And as they sat across from each other, as he looked into her eyes, Chris Watts made up his mind. He didn't just want out of his marriage. He wanted a new life. A clean slate. And in his mind, there was only one way to get it. August 12, 2018. By now, Shanann knew something was deeply wrong. She had spent weeks trying to hold on, trying to find the man she had married. But he was gone. The last time they spoke on the phone, she could feel it in her bones. Something was about to break. Something was coming, and she was powerless to stop it. That night, she sent Chris one final message before boarding a plane back home. Shanann, can you please be honest with me? Don't make me feel stupid for trusting you. Chris. No response. At 1:48 a.m., Shanann Watts stepped off the plane in Colorado. She was exhausted. She was pregnant. And she was returning to a home where the man she loved was waiting for her. A man who had already decided that this was the last night she would ever see. As Shanann pleaded for emotional closeness, Chris Watts was slipping further from the life he had built. The man who once adored her, who once held her tightly and whispered reassurances in the dark, was no longer there. His body was present, but his heart, his mind, they were elsewhere. With someone else. That someone was Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum. She was young, attractive, and, most importantly, not part of the life he had grown tired of. Their connection was new, exciting, unburdened by responsibility. In Chris's mind, she represented a different future, one where he was free from the obligations of marriage, fatherhood, and a past he no longer wanted. At first, Shanann noticed the small things, things that any wife might catch. A change in routine. A shift in behavior. Chris had always been in good shape, but now he was obsessed with working out, spending hours at the gym when he was supposed to be home. His eating habits changed. His wardrobe changed. He started spending more time on his phone, guarding it in a way he never had before. He became distant. Conversations grew shorter. Affection disappeared. He avoided her touch, barely acknowledged her presence. And yet, when she confronted him, he brushed it off. He was just stressed. Just tired. Just dealing with things he couldn't explain. But Shanann knew better. She knew this man. She had built a life with him. And she knew, deep down, that something was very, very wrong. Shanann's desperate confessions to a friend. Shanann to her friend Nicole. He hasn't touched me all week, kissed me, talked to me except for when I'm trying to figure out what is wrong. I don't know who he is anymore. Despite everything, Shanann wasn't ready to give up. She was a fighter. She had always been. When life had knocked her down, she had gotten back up, again and again. This, her marriage, her family, was worth fighting for. She ordered a book. Hold Me Tight. A relationship guide designed to rekindle intimacy and rebuild broken trust. It was her way of reaching out, of saying, let's fix this. Let's find each other again. She left it for Chris, hoping he would open it, read its pages, see the effort she was making. Chris threw it away. Shanann was losing him. She felt it in every quiet meal, in every unanswered text, in every night spent lying awake beside a man who had already checked out. Still, she wasn't ready to admit what she feared most, that there was someone else. But soon, the lies would no longer hold. Chris's affair wasn't just emotional. It wasn't just a brief moment of infidelity. It was a full-fledged double life, carefully constructed to avoid detection. He deleted texts, erased calls, covered his tracks. He was meticulous, careful, until he wasn't. Shanann saw the bank statement. A dinner charge. The kind of meal that wasn't meant for one person. She knew he hadn't been with friends. She knew in that moment that she had been right all along. Chris was no longer just spending time with Nicole, he was building a future with her. He told her what she wanted to hear. That he was trapped in a marriage that didn't fulfill him. That he was unhappy. That he wanted out. And she believed him. Nicole saw him as a man on the verge of freedom. A man shedding the past to embrace something new. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Chris wasn't planning a divorce. He wasn't filing paperwork, preparing custody agreements, or discussing separation. No. His plan was something much darker. Because in his mind, there was only one way to truly be free. By early August, Shanann was unraveling. She was exhausted, carrying the weight of a marriage that no longer felt like home. She texted Chris again, one last plea for honesty. Shanann, can you please be honest with me? Don't make me feel stupid for trusting you. Chris. No response. At this point, Chris wasn't just pulling away, he was already gone. His heart belonged to someone else, his mind fixated on the life he believed was waiting for him. Shanann, pregnant and emotionally drained, boarded a plane back to Colorado, not knowing that she was walking into a nightmare. Not knowing that the man waiting for her had already decided how this story would end. August 11, 2018, the lie that sealed her fate. It was a Saturday night. Chris Watts stood in his home, preparing to leave. He had told Shanann he had plans with friends, that he was going to a Rockies baseball game in Denver. But that was a lie. In truth, there was no game. No friends waiting for him at the stadium. Instead, he had meticulously planned another evening with Nicole Kessinger. A night to indulge in the fantasy life he had built with her, one without Shanann, without his children, without the weight of responsibility that had once defined his existence. Before he left, he arranged for a babysitter to watch Bella and Celeste. He needed the house to be empty. He needed the illusion to remain intact. Shanann, still in Arizona for a business trip, had no idea what was happening back home. No idea that her husband, the father of her children, was about to solidify his betrayal. Chris took Nicole to a local brewery, then to a luxurious dinner at the Lazy Dog. He ordered food, drinks, sat across from her with a smile that was no longer strained or forced. He was happy. He was free. And he was spending the family's money to celebrate it. Later that night, he used his personal credit card for the bill, a careless mistake, one that would later expose the truth to Shanann. As he sat with Nicole, laughing, drinking, pretending he was a single man, Shanann was thousands of miles away, texting him. Reaching out. Checking in. Her messages went unanswered for hours. It was a small betrayal compared to what was coming. But for Shanann, it was the moment she knew, truly knew, that something W. Back in Colorado, Chris wasn't thinking about fixing things. He wasn't thinking about working on his marriage. He was texting Nicole, deleting messages, preparing. In his mind, there was no future with Shanann. No future with Bella or Celeste. He had already decided how this would end. That evening, Chris called his parents in North Carolina. A conversation took place that no one but them will ever truly understand. But after that call, something inside him shifted. He spent hours alone in the house, pacing, waiting, knowing that time was running out. August 13, 2018, 1:48 a.m., the final moments. The clock had passed midnight. The house was silent still. The girls were asleep in their beds, their soft breathing the only sound in the darkness. Chris sat awake, waiting, his thoughts a storm of contradictions. He had already made his choice, but now, in the stillness of the night, the weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him. And then, the headlights appeared. 1:48 a.m. Surveillance footage captured Shanann Watts stepping onto the porch of her home, dragging her suitcase behind her. She was exhausted from the long flight, from the emotional turmoil of the past few weeks, from carrying a child who would never get the chance to be born. The door opened. Chris stood there, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Shanann walked inside. The door shut behind her. No one would ever see Shanann Watts alive again. The final hours. What happened inside the Watts home between 1:48 a.m. and the early morning hours of August 13th is something only one person truly knows. Chris has told his version. He has rewritten it, reshaped it, offered different explanations at different times. But the facts remain. The outcome remains. Shanann never left that house again. By dawn, Bella and Celeste were gone too. Chris Watts had carried out something unimaginable. Something that would leave a permanent scar not only on his family but on everyone who ever knew them. But Chris Watts was not a criminal mastermind. He was not a man with a foolproof plan. And as the sun rose over Colorado that morning, he had no idea that the world was about to unravel every single lie he had told. What happened next is something no one could have imagined. A crime that would send shockwaves through an entire nation. A betrayal so unfathomable, so horrific, that even those closest to Chris Watts could not believe it. Sometime after 1:48 a.m., when Shanann stepped into the house for the last time, an argument began. Maybe she confronted him about the affair. Maybe she pleaded for answers, for honesty. Maybe she asked him the question she had been dreading, but already knew the answer to: do you still love me? What we do know is that at some point, Chris Watts made a choice. A choice that cannot be undone. A choice that turned him from a husband and father into something else entirely. Chris would later claim that Shanann never fought back. That she barely struggled as he took her life. But that is a lie. Because Shanann Watts was a fighter. She had fought for her family. She had fought for her husband. And in her final moments, she fought for herself, for the life growing inside her. But Chris Watts was relentless. He held her down, pressing his weight onto her, his hands wrapped around her throat. She fought to breathe, but it was no use. The man who had once vowed to protect her was the one who ended her life. And as the room fell silent, as the house grew still, the horror was just beginning. As Chris sat in the darkness, his wife's lifeless body at his feet, another sound broke the silence. A small voice. A child's voice. "What's wrong with Mommy?" It was Bella. Awake. Standing in the doorway. Watching. And behind her, Celeste, still groggy from sleep, rubbing her eyes, unaware that the world as they knew it had just changed forever. What happened next is something no words can truly capture. Two little girls, trusting, innocent, looking up at their father, expecting love, safety. But Chris Watts had already crossed a line that could never be undone. He couldn't turn back now. With calculated coldness, he carried out what he later called finishing the job. He took their small bodies, one by one, placed them into his truck, along with Shanann's, and drove them out to an oil site where he worked. The same oil site where, for years, he had built a life to support his family. The same oil site where he would now destroy them. Out in the barren landscape of Weld County, Colorado, the sun had barely begun to rise when Chris Watts made his final move. He dug a shallow grave and placed Shanann and her unborn child inside. Then, he turned to his daughters. They were still alive. He took Celeste first. He covered her face with a blanket, muffling her cries until her small body went still. Then, he did the same to Bella, his firstborn. The child who had loved him unconditionally. The child who, in her final moments, managed to whisper two words that would later haunt everyone who heard them. "Daddy, no." And then, they were gone. Their small bodies were shoved into the oil tanks. Hidden. Erased. Discarded like they had never existed. And with that, Chris Watts returned home. To a house filled with the ghosts of what he had just done. The next morning, Chris Watts did something that would shock even seasoned investigators. He played the role of the worried husband. He sent text messages to Shanann's phone, knowing she would never answer. He called her friends, pretending to be concerned when they hadn't heard from her. Then, he did something even more unbelievable. He gave a public interview. Standing outside his home, he looked straight into the camera, pleading for his family's safe return. But there was something off. Something that people noticed immediately. Chris was too calm. Too collected. His words were rehearsed, his body language stiff. There were no tears. No urgency. No real fear. And then, the cracks started to show. It didn't take long for the police to become suspicious. Chris's timeline didn't add up. His behavior was unnatural. And then, there was the neighbor's surveillance footage. A camera captured Chris Watts early that morning, backing his truck into the driveway. He was loading something large. Something he didn't want anyone to see. When detectives questioned him, he stumbled over his words. He couldn't keep his story straight. And when they asked him to take a polygraph test, he agreed. But what Chris didn't know was that he was about to make his final mistake. On August 15, 2018, Chris Watts sat in an interrogation room, a polygraph machine attached to his body. The test began. He was asked a simple question: "Did you physically harm Shanann?" The needle jumped. The test ended. The examiner looked at Chris and spoke words that sealed his fate. "Chris, you failed. Miserably." The weight of his crimes had finally caught up with him. There was nowhere left to run. His lies were unraveling. And then, the confession came. At first, he blamed Shanann. He claimed she had killed the children, and in a fit of rage, he had retaliated. But the evidence was overwhelming. And soon, under pressure, he told the truth. Chris Watts had murdered his wife. He had murdered his daughters. And he had done it all for a new life. For another woman. The world watched as Chris Watts stood in a courtroom, expressionless, as he listened to his fate. He had pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty. But there would be no escape from justice. The judge did not mince words. "This is the most inhumane, vicious crime I have ever handled in my career." Chris Watts was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would never walk free again. A family was gone. A mother, her unborn child, 2 innocent little girls, all taken by the one person who was supposed to love them the most. The question that still haunts people to this day is, why? Was it really just for an affair? Was it really just to start over? Or was there something deeper, something darker, lurking beneath the surface of a man who seemed so ordinary? There are some answers we may never truly know. This case remains one of the most haunting tragedies in recent history. A family destroyed. A mother, her unborn son, 2 innocent little girls, gone. All at the hands of someone they trusted the most. Someone who was supposed to protect them. And yet the signs were there. The distance. The secrecy. The small lies that became something much more sinister. Which leaves us with a question that many have struggled with since that fateful August morning. Could Shanann have been saved? Were there red flags that were ignored? Could anything have stopped this from happening? Or was Chris Watts always capable of something like this, waiting for the moment when his secret life became more important than the one he was supposed to cherish? We want to hear from you. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your theories, your perspectives, your voice matters. Because in cases like this, where the truth is difficult to comprehend, discussion is how we learn, how we grow, and how, hopefully, we can prevent something like this from ever happening again. Once again, we appreciate each and every one of you for supporting this channel. Your engagement, your discussions, your voices. They matter. Every like, every comment, every share helps keep these stories alive. Helps remind us all of the importance of awareness and justice. These aren't just stories. These are real lives. Real people. And they should never be forgotten. If you found this deep dive valuable, if you want more true crime stories like this, stories that don't just recount what happened, but ask the important questions, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because every story deserves to be told. And every victim deserves to be remembered.